The fog curls like smoke along the high garden walls of Ravensdene House, a Jacobean manor crouched against the downs. Inside, the house is smothered in silence, an oppressive, waiting hush. You follow Superintendent Hadley and Patrick Butler down a narrow passage whose lamps gutter nervously until they halt before the crimson-draped door of the study. The door is locked from within. Yet behind it, all agree, Sir Rowland Tremaine is dead. When at last the door is forced, the scene within is so stark, it seems painted. Sir Rowland lies across his escritoire, head pillowed on folded arms as though in uneasy sleep. The lamp on the desk throws a sulky glow across a scarlet curtain drawn across the far window, making the air seem thick with blood. But there is no blood. Only a small tumbler, overturned, its contents spilled in a pale ring across the leather blotter. The faintest dusting of white sediment clings where the liquor has dried. Butler strides forward, silk hat under arm, his eyes darting with the instinct of courtroom theatre. Bolt shot, windows fastened, chimney bricked for decades, no way in, no way out. Yet here lies our victim, alive yesterday, dead tonight, with nothing but a trickle of brandy to explain to him. He holds the glass like an exhibit before a jury. Mark the residue, Hadley. Poison. Hadley is dour and practical. He tests the window latch and shakes the handle of the inner door. Locked, yes. Curtains drawn tight. Servants swear no one crossed that threshold since 9. And yet, he frowns, squatting before the fire grate. Someone lit a blaze here earlier. The ashes are still warm. Yet the man had forbidden fires since autumn. Butler laughs sharply. Then your culprit has a taste for irony. Poison in the glass, warmth in the grate, all behind a locked door. I tell you, Hadley, it has the stamp of a conjurer's flourish. But it is the shadows that trouble you most, for the lamp's glow paints the scarlet curtain against the far wall, and on its folds you see the imprint of a figure, broad-shouldered, head bent, arms outstretched. A figure that seems to hover, darker than the red itself, as though some other body had once stood there and left its shadow burned into the cloth. The servants whisper of it already in the corridor, the Scarlet Shadow. Some swear it was there before the door was forced, as though someone, or something, watched over Sir Rowland's death. Then comes the sound you do not expect, a heavy dragging step in the hall outside, accompanied by the tap of a cane. The door creaks open wider, and into the room lumbers Dr. Gideon Fell. His vast form looms against the lamplight, cape damp with fog, shovel hat askew. Behind spectacles, his eyes twinkle with irreverent cheer, as though he has stumbled upon a birthday party instead of a corpse. "Good evening," Fell booms. "So, our friend Tremaine has contrived for himself a scarlet theatre." He chuckles, dropping heavily, into an armchair that groans. "Locked doors, brandy with a ghost's aftertaste, and... ah!" He gestures with his cane toward the curtain. "The shadow play." Butler whirls. "You see it too?" "Of course I see it," Fell answers genially. "A trick of lamp and cloth. Or else, something left behind by human hands. But mark it, gentlemen, for shadows sometimes tell truths bodies dare not." Hadley mutters, "I'll call it an illusion until proven otherwise." A locked room, a glass of poison, a frightened household. That's trouble enough. Fell leans forward, eyes narrowing. Then ask yourself, why a fire in the grate? Why a shadow on the curtain? And why? He lifts a finger, joviality slipping. Does the latch of the window bear a smear of soot, though the chimney has been bricked for 40 years? The silence that follows is almost physical. The scarlet curtain stirs faintly in a draught no one can find. And you hear Butler draw in his breath sharply, as though realizing for the first time that Sir Rowland Tremaine may not have been the only victim in the room. The story of Sir Rowland's impossible death runs ahead of you like fog down a lane. By the time Hadley clears the study, the servants have already told it 3 different ways. The door was found ajar and then locked. The window flew open by itself. The scarlet curtain moved, though no one touched it. Outside the iron gates, a reporter from the Gazette breathes into his hands and asks whether the shadow on the cloth is a sign or a stain. You watch the tale grow baroque in the very air. Hadley, who despises embroidery, plants a constable at the hall and another at the garden door. No one in, no one out, he says. Statements at once. His voice flattens the whispers, almost. Butler, on the other hand, flourishes in rumour like a barrister in confetti. Let them talk, Hadley, he murmurs, hat tucked under elbow. Every embellishment is a thread. Tug the right one and the whole tapestry slides off the wall. Dr. Fell has wedged himself into a low chair, his cape shed, his spectacles misted, his cane across his knees like a laid-down cudgel. He lets people speak. It is astonishing how much people will volunteer to a large, polite man who appears to be napping. Mrs. Bidds, the housekeeper, solid, affronted, the sort who polishes gilt off surfaces by rubbing harder, plants her feet. I closed the scarlet curtains at dusk, same as always, and I laid the fire in the morning and no further. Sir Rowland forbade fires, said smoke curdled the eyes. Wilkes, the valet, thin and precise. His orders changed, ma'am. He asked me to bring cocoa at 9:25. The door was locked. I knocked. He said, "Leave it." I left it on the tray. "You told me he never took cocoa," Mrs. Bidds snaps. Wilkes cools her with a look. "He did last night." Butler glances at Hadley, pleased. First contradiction, Superintendent. The housekeeper says no fires and curtains at dusk. The valet says cocoa at 9:25 and a locked door. Yet the ashes were warm and the shadow suggests a body posed after the lamp was lit. He tilts his head toward Fell. "Whose recollection shall we prefer?" "To neither," Fell rumbles, eyes crinkling. "Contradiction is where truth begins. Proceed." A parlour-maid named Alice, hands wringing the corners of her apron, offers the next twist. "Beg pardon, sir, but I heard the study bell at about 9:30. Mr. Wilkes had just passed, and I was in the back passage. It rang hard, like he was cross." "The bell cannot be rung," Mrs. Bidds insists. "We had the wire seen a fortnight ago. It sticks." Alice persists, poor little brave thing. "It rang, ma'am. I nearly jumped." Second contradiction, Butler murmurs. A bell that both sticks and shouts. "Put a ribbon on it, Hadley. We'll open it later." Sir Rowland's niece, Miss Julia Tremaine, stands very straight, chin up, with a touch of defiance that suggests she's only recently learned how to use it. "Uncle changed the curtain this week," she says, "surprising you. He had me choose the clothes at Grimes and Son. He said the old damask depressed him. The scarlet is new." Mrs. Bidds rounds on her. "New? Rubbish. That curtain has hung since the Jubilee." "It was changed," Miss Julia insists. "Ask Mr. Grimes. He sent Tom with the package on Tuesday. Uncle said the red would warm the room." Butler's eyebrows climb. Third contradiction, heirloom versus recent purchase. "Superintendent, our tapestry is slipping already." Hadley, who writes none of the adjectives all the time, says only, "Write it down." A gardener, cap crushed in both hands, shuffles in to say he saw smoke from the study chimney at 7:30, plain as a map, though the flues are supposed to be bricked. Mrs. Bidds says he saw mist and imagination. The coachman heard the grandfather clock strike the quarter at 9:15 and 9:30. Wilkes swears the clock stopped yesterday afternoon. The Gazette man, who has somehow elbowed closer despite 2 constables and Hadley's glare, announces that gentlemen at the club saw Sir Rowland quarrel last week with a slick young solicitor over a paper and a payment. By the time he's finished, You have 2 quarrels, 3 times, and a curtain that is simultaneously ancient and brand new. Fell does not argue. He levered himself up, murmured thanks, and waddled back to the study as if returning to a favourite library chair. He stands in the doorway, peering inward without crossing. You see him note small domestic things, the ash in the grate clotted in curls as though paper burned with it, a poker bright at the tip and dull along the shaft, the lamp wick trimmed too neatly for a man who feared curdled eyes, a smear of soot along the window latch where no clean hand should have strayed. He nods once, as if a private list inside his head has received its due ticks. "Doctor," Butler prompts, unable to endure silence. "Your shadow on the cloth, is it a miracle or a muddle?" "A muddle, made to look like a miracle," Fell says. "But I advise you not to take it down yet, Mr. Butler. Shadows do not confess when you tear them, only when you observe how they fall." Hadley bars the study again, addresses the householders to procedure, and the Gazette man at last is shepherded out to smoke with the gardener and write a column that will be twice as false and 3 times as compelling as anything said in this hall. The ripple spreads, down the lane, into the village, into the club where a man with a red face will swear he saw the Scarlet Shadow move, and another will swear he saw Sir Rowland raise his glass and drink without a flinch. "Did he drink without a flinch?" Butler asks suddenly, turning on Wilkes. The valet blinks. "I wasn't there to see." "But he told you to leave cocoa," Butler pressed velvet hard. "Cocoa, with brandy. Does he ever mix the two?" "Never," Wilkes says, offended by the thought. "Then why brandy now?" Butler's smile sweetens. "Unless someone encouraged it," Miss Julia bristles. "Uncle needed brandy after his quarrels." "With whom?" Butler's eyes gleamed. She hesitates. "With Mr. Avery, the agent, and perhaps with Mr. Pargeter at the club. They said Uncle owed subscriptions, and he said they owed him respect." She lifts her chin. "Men quarrel. It doesn't make them victims." "No," Fell says mildly from the doorway. "But it can make them theatrically careful." He ambles back to the grate, studies the ash again, and prods it with his cane so delicately it scarcely stirs. A charred curl lifts, wafer thin, and flutters on the draught he somehow feels without seeming to move. He traps it on his palm and peers. The coil has printed itself faintly, blackened edges, pale interior with a ghost of letters. Fot, perhaps, or your imagination playing tricks. "Paper?" Hadley asks. "Paper," Fell agrees, dropping it back into the ash. "Of no consequence to you yet, Superintendent, except to note that Sir Rowland burned something that printed ghosts even as it died." The Gazette man, back again like a cork in tide, whispers to Butler that a travelling lecturer once showed shadow pictures on red cloth at the assembly rooms, lamps and silhouettes, and that Sir Rowland subscribed. Butler fans at once turn this into a scandal. Hadley stares until the man evaporates. Contradictions accumulate like snow. Mrs. Bidds maintains she turned down the lamps at 8. Wilkes insists he did so at 9. Miss Julia swears her uncle despised lamplight and would have used only the fire if he'd allowed it. The gardener says the smoke smelled like paper and something sour, and the parlour-maid repeats stubbornly that the bell pull rang hard at past. Fell writes nothing. He is not disproving anyone, he is arranging them on a shelf. At last, he turns to the room at large, geniality back in place like a hat set square. "Only one more trifle. Who hung the new curtain?" Mrs. Bidds opens her mouth to deny the premise. Miss Julia opens hers to insist upon it. Neither speaks, because Alice, small voice, big courage, answers first. "I did, sir." "Ah?" Fell's eyes soften. "When?" "Last night," she says, twisting her apron. "At 9:15. Sir Roland told me to. He said the drought made him do fancy things. I took down the old brown, and I pinned the red over it just for the night. I meant it to them properly in the morning." "Pinned?" Hadley repeats. "Yes, sir. The hooks weren't mended." Hadley and Butler both look at the study as if the cloth could hear. Fell's spectacles catch the lamplight until his eyes disappear in brightness. He nods very slowly, as though some private scale inside him has at last tipped. You feel the corridor draw tight around you. The fog beyond the windows seems to press its face to the glass to listen. If the Scarlet was hung at 9:15, the shape on it cannot be Sir Roland's final pose. It was stamped there before he died, by some other body, some other lamp, some other hour. And as the truth settles, you hear in your own head the line no rumour has yet dared to speak. The Scarlet Shadow does not belong to the man who died beneath it. The revelation that the scarlet curtain had been hung only at 9:15 drifts through the household like a cold wind. Whispers scurry along the corridor, servants exchange frightened looks, and Butler, eyes alight with theatrical satisfaction, seizes upon the admission as though it were a verdict already rendered. "Do you not see, Hadley?" he demands, striking his palm with the edge of his glove. The shadow was not Sir Roland. Someone else stood there poised like a grotesque portrait. The lamp burned the shape upon the cloth. It is not a miracle, but a witness. That shadow names our visitor. Hadley's frown deepens, his pen scratching furiously in his book. Or it names confusion, Butler. A lamp, a curtain pinned in haste, a maid's trembling recollection. None of that makes a murderer. Fell lumber forward, cane clattering faintly against the tiles, and plants himself before the curtain. The shadow, indistinct now, still lurks faintly in the folds like the memory of a figure burned into the fabric. He peers, tugging gently at the pinned edge. Pinned, not hooked. Clothes thin, lamps near, and a body between. Yes, Butler, you may strut, for in this instance, your theatre is justified. But the theatre will not yet tell us whose part was played. You follow as the three men return to the study itself. The air inside smells faintly of charred paper and brandy soured with something acrid. Fell moves slowly, allowing silence to settle, watching how the others disturb it with nervous chatter. Butler prowls the desk, turning over papers. A bill from Grimes and Son, untouched. A letter half written. And here, he lifts a scrap burned at the corner. Someone tried to destroy this but bungled it. Can you make sense of it, Hadley? Hadley squints. Only fragments. Phot could be photograph, or perhaps phonograph. The rest is ash. Fell chuckles, low and wheezy. Ghosts leave traces even when burned. Remember that. He stoops with an effort beside the hearth, lifting the poker. Its tip is bright, the rest dull with soot. An object heated, used, and cleaned on the end, but not for coal. What was pressed, singed, or sealed here? No one answers. Silence pushes like fog on the windows. Hadley breaks it with a blunt question. If someone stood to cast that shadow, why did no one see him leave? Fell rests his cane across the desk and gestures to the door. Because the trick is not in the leaving, Superintendent. The trick is in persuading you he was never there. Butler pounces on the thought, voice rising in courtly cadence. You mean he walked out past servants, past the gardener, past all the eyes in the house, and yet convinced them they had seen nothing? Precisely, Fell murmurs. Polite lies again. People avert their gaze when they feel it is courteous to do so. They misremember times because to remember accurately would embarrass someone. We swim in such deceits. To illustrate his point, he beckons Alice, the timid parlour maid. Child, when you said the bell rang, Did you mean you heard the clapper strike, or only the rope twitch? She twists her apron. I heard it, sir. A sharp ring. Even though your housekeeper says the wire sticks. Alice swallows. Yes, sir, I must have been wrong. You see? Fell rumbles, turning to Hadley. Already she rewrites her own memory to please authority. That is the ground in which impossibility grows. Hadley sighs, rubbing his temple. Very clever. But it doesn't bring us nearer to who poisoned him. Butler interrupts, brandishing the stained glass. And yet, here we have our villain's fingerprint in powder. The white sediment is no harmless dregs. Feel, you must admit it points to poison. I admit nothing until the glass is tested, Hadley snaps, though his eyes betray unease. Fell leans closer, genial again. Butler is half right. Sediment matters. But the riddle is not what killed Sir Rowland, but how it was given to him in a room no hand should have reached. That is the true knot. The hour grows late, and one by one the household drifts away, leaving the three men alone in the study. Fell lowers himself heavily into the armchair, wheezing, and lets his eyes wander over the ordinary domestic scene. The lamp trimmed too neatly, the curtain pinned, not sewn, the fire kindled against orders, and the poker bright at its tip. Each trifle seems meaningless alone, yet together they hum with secret coherence. Hadley finally snaps his notebook. We'll call it suicide until proven otherwise. He locked himself in, poured poison in his brandy, and died. The rest, the shadow, the fire, the contradictions, is embroidery. Butler flares at once. Suicide? With a shadow play as an epitaph? Nonsense. If you won't prosecute a murderer, I'll argue the case myself until the world believes me. This was no accident of despair. Fell interrupts gently, tapping his cane. Neither of you is wrong, but neither of you is right. What we face here is not suicide nor miracle, but something altogether more deliberate. Tonight, let's call it theatre. Tomorrow we will see whose hand wrote the playbill. The clock in the hall strikes midnight, each chime echoing like a hammer. And as the final note fades, you notice the scarlet curtain shift again, though no draught stirs and no one has touched it. The faint imprint of the shadow quivers, as if the unseen figure that made it has returned to take its place once more. The shadow on the curtain still trembles in your mind when Hadley strides forward and yanks the drapery hard to steal it. The scarlet folds sway once, then hang limply. Enough of phantoms, he growls. We'll have facts, and the fact is this. Sir Rowland Tremaine locked himself in his study, poured poison into his own brandy, and died. That is my working theory until I see something solid to contradict it. Butler lets out a bark of incredulous laughter. Suicide? In this theatre of riddles? No, Hadley. No jury would buy it. Why fire into the grate against his own decree? Why summon Coco? He never drank. Why contrive a curtain of scarlet to stage his own silhouette? You call this neat. I call it nonsense. He flourishes toward Fell as though presenting evidence to the bench. Doctor, tell the superintendent he's wrong. Fell does not rise to the challenge. He lumbers toward the desk, cane tapping, and lowers his bulk into the armchair with a wheeze. His spectacles glitter. The superintendent is not wrong, Butler. He is merely tidy. Policemen love tidy theories. They sweep away clutter. Suicide is always tidy. He lifts the poker, the bright tip catching the lamplight. But the world, gentlemen, is not tidy. It leaves smears on window latches and burns papers in grates. Hadley folds his arms. Then let's hear your alternative. Not yet, Fell replies, genial again. A conjurer does not show the trapdoor before the trick is done. For now, let the superintendent's neat bundle lie. We shall see how long it holds when tugged. The tugging begins at once. Butler prowls to the desk and lifts the half-written letter Sir Rowland had left behind. My dear Pargeter, he reads. Then nothing but a blot. What was our victim about to confess, eh? A debt, a quarrel, or perhaps an accusation. If he meant to send a letter, it was interrupted. And suicide, superintendent, is rarely so polite as to begin with a salutation. Hadley snatches the page, eyes narrowing. Could be anything. He may have meant to ask forgiveness before taking his dose. Don't embroider it. The valet Wilkes is recalled, and under Butler's sharp questioning, he admits that Sir Rowland seemed unsettled the night before. Walking up and down, muttering about shadows, he says reluctantly. Butler seizes the phrase. There, not despair, but dread. He knew something was coming for him. Perhaps he even knew who. Fell chuckles, low and thunderous. Words are smoke, Butler. Shadows, dread, quarrels. They can be made to mean anything. No, the riddle lies in procedure. Observe what the man did, not what he said. He gestures with his cane. The wine decanter on the desk, the cocoa tray left untouched, the lamp trimmed too neatly, and the curtain pinned, not sewn. Domestic procedures, gentlemen. Little habits are broken or performed strangely. Those are where impossibilities unravel. Hadley, irritated, returns to the glass. Residue is residue. We'll send it for analysis, but I'll wager chloral hydrate. A man with insomnia drinks too much of it, whether by design or accident, and never wakes again. Butler scoffs. Then explain why the bell was rung hard enough for the maid to hear. A man drugged into a stupor cannot tug a rope. Unless in a last spasm, Hadley retorts. I've seen it before. Fell shakes his head, pipe unlit between fat fingers. And yet, Superintendent, a spasm does not leave a rope swinging in measured strokes. It leaves chaos. Someone wished the bell to ring, and someone contrived it. The household files back in for further questioning. Mrs. Bidds insists again that the scarlet curtain is old. Miss Julia repeats that it was bought new. Alice sticks stubbornly to her story of the bell. Each retelling warps the facts until they contradict one another so thoroughly that suicide seems too smooth an answer to cover them all. Butler, seizing the advantage, stages a little courtroom gambit. He wheels suddenly on Wilkes. You said you left cocoa on a tray. Where is that tray now? In the pantry, sir. Unwashed? I believe so. Hadley sends Briggs to fetch it. When it arrives, the little cup still carries a faint rim of white dust at its bottom. Butler thunders triumphantly. Behold! If Sir Rowland meant to drink poison, why were 2 cups prepared? Why brandy and cocoa both? No man kills himself with such indecision. But a murderer, yes. A murderer sets multiple snares and waits to see which his victim will drink. Hadley frowns, discomfited, but falls back on his refrain. Coincidence. He may have toyed with cocoa and chosen brandy instead. I'll not hang a man on a teaspoon of dust. Fell's eyes glint. And yet, Superintendent, it is the teaspoon that hangs you. A neat theory cannot hold when trifles begin to shout. The silence that follows is heavy. Outside, the fog has thickened again, pressing its damp face against the panes. You sense the household straining against each other's contradictions, as if each were trying to make his memory fit Hadley's suicide. Butler breaks the silence with a triumphant laugh. There, Hadley, your neatness collapses already. Suicide? No, this is murder wrapped in theatre, and if you won't prosecute it, I will plead it to the world myself. Hadley snaps his notebook shut. Enough. Until I have proof of an intruder, suicide remains my working case. He turns toward the door, jaw tight. But at that instant, Fell leans back in his chair and raises one fat finger, pointing toward the scarlet curtain. It stirs again, not with the idle sway of fabric, but with a ripple that moves from top to bottom, as though a hand pressed against it from the other side. Every head turns. The breath stills in the room. And you watch Butler draw in sharply, realizing that if Hadley's suicide theory is to be believed, then the house itself has learned how to move. The ripple of the curtain subsides at last, sagging limp as though it had never moved. Yet the hush it leaves behind is thicker than fog. Butler's eyes gleam with courtroom fire. There, Hadley! Suicide, you said. Then explain the hand that presses cloth from the other side of a brick chimney. Hadley growls, striding to the window latch. He jerks it once, rattles the frame, then glares at the heavy folds of scarlet. A drought! These old houses breathe through their bones. You saw wind, nothing more. But even he sounds unconvinced. Fell rises ponderously, tapping his cane across the floorboards as though listening for hollow echoes. He pauses before the window ledge, and his eyes, glittering behind misted spectacles, fix on something so small you nearly miss it. With a grunt, he lowers his girth, touches one sausage-like finger to the brass latch, and lifts it into the lamplight. A smudge, he says. The faintest streak of grey, not dust, not soot from an open flue. No, graphite, rubbed smooth. And where there is graphite, gentlemen, there has been deliberate friction. Butler pounces. A pencil mark? Someone scraped at the latch? Not scraped, Fell replies. Polished, something looped here, drawn tight. A thread, perhaps. A wire. Nothing grand, but trifles, gentlemen. Trifles shout louder than shouts. Hadley shifts uneasily. You'll argue a murder built on a pencil smear. I will argue an illusion built on one, Fell corrects. Consider a latch that bears marks though the chimney is bricked, a bell that rings through its wire sticks, curtains hung with pins, not hooks, all petty things. And yet, if you mean to conjure impossibility, you must first rehearse in trifles. The household gathers again under questioning. Mrs. Bidds bristles at the insinuation of her curtains being pinned. Alice repeats her timid story of the bell. Wilkes insists upon cocoa and a locked door, and Miss Julia Tremaine defends her uncle's change of taste. Each time they speak, their words rub against one another like stones, striking sparks of contradiction. Butler weaves these sparks into arguments, dazzling but incomplete. It is Miss Arden, the companion nurse, who adds the next note. She is pale and self-contained, hands folded like paper. Sir Rowland often spoke of drafts, she says quietly. He swore he felt them in rooms where none should be. He had me tack carpets and seal windows. Only yesterday he said the house had veins that breathed. Fell turns his head sharply, spectacles glinting. Veins that breathed, he repeats. How very apt. And you tacked the carpets? Yes, doctor, especially in the study. He said they lifted when no one walked. Butler seizes her admission. There, a trick of carpets, of wires beneath. Fell silences him with a cane lift. Not yet. We collect trifles, trifles in carpet edges, trifles in bell ropes, trifles in latches. No single one condemns. Together, they form a stage. Hadley's irritation deepens. Meanwhile, a man lies dead. I will not turn Scotland Yard into a debating society for dust and curtains. Until poison is proved, I say again, suicide is the only reasonable theory. But even as he speaks, Briggs the constable arrives from the pantry with the cocoa tray Butler had pressed into evidence. Beg pardon, sir, he says nervously, but the cup, it wasn't in the pantry, as Wilkes said. It was tucked behind the scullery bin. Hadley stiffens. Behind? Yes, sir. And the bottom's got a faint ring like it was wiped, not washed. Fell wheezes a chuckle. So, our tidy valet is untidy after all. Or someone used his tidiness for cover. A cup was placed where servants would not look closely, but was not destroyed. A trifle, yes, but trifles are like nails. Enough of them, and they fasten a coffin shut. Butler claps his hands once. Superintendent, you must admit it now. Someone tampered with both drinks. Not suicide, but a hand in the shadows. Hadley exhales hard through his nose, refusing to answer. He turns away toward the curtain again, as though hoping its folds might hide his doubt. Fell, however, lumbers nearer the hearth. He stoops to poke again at the ashes, bringing up another curl of blackened paper. This one, when held to the lamplight, reveals half a word. Autograph. The rest is gone to soot. Photograph, Butler supplies instantly. He burned a photograph. Proof of something. Proof of someone. Or phonograph, Hadley says dryly. You leap to conclusions. Fell lets the curl drift back into the grate. Conclusions are for later. For now, we hold contradictions like coins in a purse. When we have enough, we may pay for truth. The lamps hiss faintly, the fire sinks lower, and the air in the room grows tight again. You sense everyone, straining to hide some private shame or lie, too small to confess, yet too large to suppress. The trivial things, smears, smudges, pins, cups, begin to carry a dreadful weight. Then, without warning, the bell in the corridor clangs once, loud and sharp, though no one stands near the rope. Alice gasps. Mrs. Bidds crosses herself, and Butler's head jerks round, eyes blazing. Hadley shouts for order, but the sound echoes in the stillness like a taunt. And as silence rushes back, you notice that Fell is not looking at the bell at all. His gaze is fixed on Julia Tremaine, who has gone very white, her hand pressed to her throat as if the sound had called her by name. The bell's clang seems to hang in the air long after the sound dies. And in that hush, you notice Julia Tremaine's hand at her throat, a child's gesture that does not fit the steel in her eyes. Fell turns his big head toward her with a mildness that is almost courtesy. You know that ring, he says, not as a question. It's the study bell, she answers too quickly. It reminded me of nursery days. Miss Arden, composed as porcelain, steps in with quiet firmness. Miss Julia was with me when it rang, Doctor. In the morning room, we were discussing arrangements. Her gaze flicks toward the servants, inviting them to hear and remember that. Fell smiles, genial as a fire. Then the morning room shall testify to your conversation. He returns his glasses to a scarlet cloth. Meanwhile, Superintendent, the house will not hold its breath forever. Let it exhale. Call in your outside players. Clubs and shops remember what households prefer to forget. Hadley dispatches Briggs with brusque orders. Before the hour turns, Ravensdean's orbit begins to revolve through the hall. Mr. Avery, the estate agent, arrives first, thin, carefully brushed, with the air of a man who apologizes for his shoes by polishing them twice. He bows to Julia, not quite deferential, and to Hadley with a dry professionalism. A shock to us all, he murmurs. Sir Roland was an exacting client. Exactly enough to quarrel? Butler asks silkily. Avery's smile thins. Frequently, on Tuesday he demanded that I reduce certain allowances. On Wednesday, he insisted they be restored. He had a habit of revising impulses. To whom were these allowances? Fell inquires, like a man asking after the weather. To a distant cousin's widow, Avery says. And to Miss Julia, a small quarterly stipend. Julia does not flinch. He never meant to starve me, Mr. Butler. He merely used money as a walking stick to tap people where it hurt. Did you meet him yesterday? Hadley says. Briefly. I left at 8. Avery's gaze slides sideways. The vicar can vouch for me at past. Put a ribbon on that, Butler mutters to you. We shall see if the vicar's clock runs fast when kindness asks it. Mr. Grimes of Grimes and Son Drapers follows, a florid man, whose indignation comes folded in tissue paper. "We sold the Scarlet," he trumpets. "Good cotton, 21 shillings, wholly proper for a study, though I advised a duller tone. Sir Rowland sent for a shade, said the old cloth depressed him. Tom took the parcel on Tuesday." "Shade?" Fell repeats, as if turning the word in his mouth. "Did he specify flameproof?" Grimes preens. "He asked. We had none to suit. I told him to keep the lamps at a sensible distance. Tom reported the gentleman had, what do you call it? Oh, a lantern case in a tin. Fancy foreign thing." Butler's eyebrows leap. "A lantern?" "Box with a glass face," Grimes says. "For showing pictures," Tom thought. Hadley's pen pauses. "Who signed for the parcel?" Grimes looks trapped for a moment, then smooths himself. "The maid, Alice." Alice nods miserably. "I pinned it across like he told me, sir." Mr. Pargeter of the club is next. Sleek, scented, with the practiced boredom of a man who keeps spares of his own opinions. "I warned him," he says. "Shadow shows and theatricals invite weak company. He brought a photograph to the table last week, waved it under Avery's nose, and said it proved a dishonest hand. Then he burned it on principle, he said." Pargeter smiles a small, malicious smile. "Principles burn beautifully, Superintendent. They're exceedingly dry." "A photograph of what?" Butler presses. "Of whom, rather," Pargeter purrs. "I didn't see, but the posture was compromising." His glance flicks, snake-quick, toward Julia, then away. He liked to threaten with proof. Mr. Kemp, the chemist, drifts in last, moustache tidy, memory tidier. "Sir Rowland asked for graphite sticks 10 days ago, said his window sash resisted. Also soda crystals, a little hypo for plates, thiosulfate." "Photographic," Butler says, pouncing. "And a bottle of sal volatile," Kemp finishes blandly. "I sold what I could without a recipe." Hadley shuts his book. "Enough theatre. We have a quarrel at the club, a picture burned, an estate quarrel, a new curtain, and a lantern. None of it proves a hand behind a locked door." Fell looks almost tender. "No, Hadley. Proof is a shy bird, but listen to its rustle." He gestures toward the floor. "Miss Arden, you tacked the carpets. When?" "Yesterday afternoon. Here at the sill." "At the corners," she says. "He said the edge lifted when no one walked." She flushes, as though ashamed of the superstition. Butler prowls toward the threshold with a barrister's relish. A floor that lifts itself, a bell that rings itself, a curtain that moves by will, a window latch that tastes of graphite. Ah, Superintendent, shall we not call the house haunted? Or shall we say only that someone taught it to pretend so? Hadley gives him a glare, then snaps to Briggs. "Fetch the errand boy, Tom." When Tom arrives, cap in mangled hand, dreadfully clean ears, Butler begins an easy patter that would strip the rind from an orange without breaking the juice. "You delivered the parcel on Tuesday. What time?" 9:15, sir." "Your clock or ours?" "Neither." "The hall clock was stopped, sir," Tom blurts, grateful to be clever. "I took it by the tram that goes past the lane. It runs from 21 to 8:39. He brightens. "I remember because I missed it." Butler's smile gleams. "So, Superintendent, the clock we've all been hugging is a liar. The house's times are as false as its shadows." Mr. Avery, who has watched this with a solicitor's frown, clears his throat. "If the clock lies, it lies for all. My arrival and departure cannot be pinned to it." Hadley says dryly, "We have the vicar to pin you instead." Avery inclines his head, the smallest bow on a string drawn tight. "Naturally." "Kind alibis," Fell murmurs to himself, like a man tasting wine. Miss Arden hears. "Kindness is not a crime, Doctor." "No," Fell says, eyes twinkling. "But it is a splendid veil." The servants are dismissed. The hall empties. The fog presses its patient face against the panes. Fell remains, big and quiet, with that air he has of listening to a building, rather than the people in it. At length, he moves to the study door and strokes the grain with his cane. Habits, he says softly. Small habits. Who uses the right-hand chair? Who sets the lamp to the left of the ink? Who leaves a cup on the tray rather than the desk? His eyes slip toward Miss Arden's gloves, neat as folded envelopes. Who carries pens? She flushes, and for the first time, you see a tremor in her composure. I pinned the hem of Miss Julia's cuff this morning, she says quickly, too quickly. It's frayed. Julia's chin rises. I can pin my own cuffs. Of course, Miss Arden replies, with the kind of lie so polished you could see yourself in it. Fell's geniality returns like a cloak. Ladies, forgive an old man's prying. Superintendent, post a man at the conservatory and another at the side door. Mr. Butler, let the club stew in its stories. Tonight we shall not test machinery. We shall only watch where the house breathes. Butler sighs theatrically. Deny me my fireworks now, and I'll demand twice the rockets when you choose to produce them. Later, Fell says placidly. Tricks are ruined when rushed. As you turn to go, your heel clicks on something small and hard by the skirting. You stoop and find a dull brass pin, head flattened by pliers, sticky with a smear of reddish wax. Butler holds it between finger and thumb, eyebrows dancing. Curtain pin, superintendent, and wax, where no candle should drip. Fell's joviality slips for a heartbeat. Don't drop it, he says softly. That little thing may hold the shadow to the cloth better than any hook. Hadley pockets it, face set. Enough. Everyone to their quarters. We lock doors and keep watch. You step into the corridor. The lamps dim, as if the house were drawing down its eyelids, and just as the silence settles, a thin light blooms in the conservatory, a lantern square, sudden and scarlet, throwing a long, inhuman shadow across the frosted glass, as if someone inside has raised a hand you cannot see. The red lantern glow in the conservatory glass holds everyone fixed for a heartbeat too long, like actors caught by a spotlight. Then Hadley barks an order, and constables thunder down the passage. The door bangs open, boots scrape on tile, and the conservatory proves empty. Only the glass panes rattle faintly in their frames, and the ferns drip water into the silence as if nothing had disturbed them. Butler bursts in after the constables, gesturing grandly toward the frosted window. You saw it! A lantern lit, and a figure lifted its hand. A second visitation, Hadley. Do you call that suicide still? Hadley's jaw sets. He prowls around the greenhouse pots, palms brushing the damp earth, peering beneath benches. No intruder, no footprints on the wet flags, no lanterns. Yet the glow was there, Fell observes from the doorway, leaning on his cane. His round eyes gleam with sardonic good humour. We must give our conjurer credit. He repeats his illusions, thereby insisting we treat them seriously. Repetition is the hallmark of frauds and performers alike. The servants huddle near the corridor lamps, pale as the mist pressing at the windows. Miss Arden shepherds Julia away from the draught, her voice calm, but Julia resists with sharp defiance. Don't coddle me, I saw it clearly. Someone stood inside, as real as you. And what of you, Miss Vane? Butler turns to the secretary, who lingers at the edge of the company, hands clasped like a prisoner's. Your eyes are sharp with documents. Did they mislead you now? Miss Vane hesitates, then shakes her head. Number. There was a light, a figure tall, but I cannot say if it was a man or a woman. Nor need you, Fell says, genial again. The play is the thing, not the actor's costume. He waddles into the conservatory, lowering himself to examine the tiles. Note this, Hadley. Soil spilled, but dry at its edges. That pot was upset earlier, and then set upright again. A small thing, but trifles whisper. Hadley growls under his breath, but his notebook swallows the fact. They search again, top to bottom. No lantern is found. Only a faint metallic tang clings to the air, like phosphorus burned in a classroom experiment. Butler sniffs it eagerly. Chemistry superintendent. A conjurer's lamp that leaves no wick. Our chemist friend Kemp, perhaps? When Kemp is fetched and pressed, he admits sheepishly that he once sold Sir Rowland a few sticks of magnesium ribbon. But weeks ago, for fireworks, he said. And it burns only once, bright as lightning. He protests, too much, but the clue settles like a fresh card on the table. As the house tries to sleep, Fell remains awake. He pads the corridors like a great bear, genial face bent in thought. You follow as he pauses at the study door, ears pricked to silence, and then moves to the bell rope in the hall. He strokes its tassel with a fat finger, noting the faint glisten of polish on one side only. A rope that shines where it should not, a tassel that remembers more than its cloth. Later, as midnight deepens, another cry splits the silence. This time, it comes from the servants' floor above. Constables clatter up, Butler at their heels, Hadley close behind. In the narrow corridor, outside Miss Julia's chamber, they find Alice the maid, trembling with terror. "It rang, sir," she gasps. "The bell pull by Miss Julia's bed. It jerked so hard it nearly broke the bracket. But she wasn't touching it. She was asleep." Julia herself appears in the doorway, pale but composed, hair loose about her shoulders. "It woke me. The cord tore the plaster when it moved. Look." She points, and indeed the bracket has strained, the cord still swinging faintly. Hadley curses under his breath. This whole house is a conspiracy. Butler, dramatic as a stagehand, seizes the moment. There, prove the pattern repeats. First in the study, then in the conservatory, now here. A murderer taunts us with impossible gestures, daring us to chase shadows. Fell wheezes as he bends, examining the cord. His finger comes away faintly smudged with the same graphite streak found on the window latch. "Threads," he murmurs. Always threads. A house sewn together by deceit. Someone has rehearsed for a long time for this performance. Hadley straightens, voice clipped. "I'll have every panel pried open by morning. I'll not see my men made fools of by string and powder tricks." "Do," Fell agrees amiably. "But note who trembles when wood is torn, and who smiles at the thought. You see Miss Arden calm but watchful, Miss Vane quiet as a shuttered room, Kemp looking away guiltily, and Avery stiff with indignation. Julia stands in her doorway with eyes bright, as though anger steels her against fear. Each one looks possible, yet none are obvious. The corridor quiets at last, but the damage is done. A second impossibility has struck, and the household is raw with dread. Butler whispers like a barrister summing up a jury. 2 shadows, 2 bells, 2 locked silences. No suicide could contrive that. Our murderer is not done. And as dawn's first light struggles against the fog, you hear the sound again. That faint metallic tick from the study's chimney wall, steady as a heartbeat, louder than before. It echoes through the still house, and every face turns toward it, pale with the certainty that the impossible will not stop until it has claimed another. By the time dawn has smudged its pale smear against the fog, the house feels hollowed out, as though the night's strange echoes have scooped something from its walls. Servants move like ghosts, whispering in corners. Miss Arden insists on tea for Julia, who protests she doesn't need coddling. Avery retreats to papers in the library, while Kemp stares too long at the shuttered conservatory, as though calculating the chemistry of its light. Dr. Gideon Fell claims the small morning room for himself. He lumbers in with his battered notebook, settles heavily into an armchair, and begins scribbling with his blunt pencil. Butler paces the hearth, eager to pry, while Hadley leans at the window, jaw set against fatigue. You listen, as you always do, while Fell half murmurs to himself and half to the air. Poisons, shadows, threads, bells, machinery and shame. He writes the words large in his book, boxing them off with thick lines. It is not enough to conjure impossibility, gentlemen. One must also conjure fear. Else, why repeat it? Why ring bells that no hand touches? Why burn lanterns in empty rooms? Butler spins on a heel. Because our murderer is a showman. He toys with us, Doctor, like a barrister baiting a jury. Look at the timing. First the locked room death, then the shadow on the curtain, then the conservatory light, then Julia's bell pull ripped from its bracket. One flourish after another. Just so, Fell agrees, spectacles flashing. And what sort of man repeats tricks? A conjurer. But conjurers are vain creatures. They cannot resist an encore. That vanity will unmask him. He pauses, notes another word. Encore. Hadley snorts. Conjurers? This is not a music hall, Fell. I deal in evidence. Sediment in a glass, a cup hidden behind the scullery bin, a curtain pinned by hand. None of those names the killer. Not yet, Fell concedes, wagging his pencil like a fat finger. But trifles name him, superintendent. The smudge on a latch, the graphite on a tassel, the polish on a rope. Each is a whisper. Put them together, and the house itself begins to confess. Butler, restless, stoops to the fire and pokes at its embers. You'll forgive me, Doctor, but I prefer confession from mouths, not ropes. Let's drag our suspects and test their stories. Cross-examination is faster than waiting for shadows. Fell chuckles, pipe between his teeth, though unlit. Your courtroom may dazzle, Butler, but timing betrays better than words. Each of them has already revealed more than they meant. He flips back a page in his notebook where crude sketches are scrawled. The study with its curtained window, the grate with ashes, and the poker bright at its tip. He has written beneath it, photograph burnt. Another diagram shows the bell run along the wall, with arrows indicating air currents, and a penciled note, veins that breathe. Sir Rowland spoke of draughts, Fell muses. He was right. The house breathes. Someone knew its chases and its seams, and used them as veins for trickery. A tug here, a thread there, and the house itself performed. Hadley shifts. All very neat. But who in this company knows the house so well? Everyone, Fell says cheerfully. The nurse who tacked carpets, the secretary who ordered repairs, the agent who managed accounts, the chemist who supplied powders, even the niece who grew up under its eaves. But knowledge is not enough. Motive is the pulse. He writes the word slowly. M-O-T-I-V-E. Sir Rowland quarrelled with Avery over allowances, threatened Pargeter with a photograph, and scorned Julia with threats of disinheritance. He burned papers and spoke of shadows. He was preparing a stage for his own denunciations. That is why he died. Not for money alone, but because shame was about to be called into the light. Butler stops pacing. You mean blackmail? That photograph was no entertainment, Fell interrupts. It was a weapon. He would have used it to destroy someone's reputation. Someone here, I think, Hadley growls. Then why the theatre of locked doors and shadows? If you want a man dead, poison his drink and be done with it. Why dress in miracles? Fell leans back, pipe clamped in teeth, laughter wheezing out. Because miracles confuse policemen, Superintendent. They make you cry suicide, and Butler cries showmanship. Meanwhile, the real purpose, concealing the photograph and the shame, slips past. The trick is not the murder. The trick is the distraction. Silence settles heavily. Butler stares, lips parted, then claps his hands once, sharp. By heaven, Fell, that's it. The murderer is a conjurer indeed. But his greatest illusion is not the bells or lanterns. It's us, chasing shadows while he hides the truth. Fell writes one last word in his book. Distraction. He closes it with a thud. Tonight, we reverse the trick. We shall provide the stage, the lamps and the curtains, and invite our players to perform. And when the mechanism creaks as it must, our conjurer will twitch. Hadley's eyes narrow. You mean a demonstration? A test, Fell corrects. Civil, harmless, but timed precisely. Shadows will fall where they should not. Bells will ring where no hand pulls. And one face, watching, will betray knowledge it ought not to have. The fat hand closes over the notebook. For a moment, the jovial mask slips, and you glimpse the severity beneath. But take care, Superintendent. Conjurers are dangerous when cornered. They may burn down their stage rather than be unmasked. Hadley pockets his notebook, voice clipped. Then I'll have men with buckets at every stair. The three men rise. Butler tosses his cigarette into the grate, eyes bright with anticipation. I'll have front row seats, Doctor. Let's see our conjurer flinch. And as you follow them out, you hear again the metallic tick deep in the walls. This time it does not stop. It grows louder, pulsing steadily as a clock wound too tight, as though the house itself were, warning that the stage is ready, and the next act will begin whether anyone wills it or not. By evening, the fog has withdrawn to the hedgerows like a sulking animal, leaving the house pricked with lamplight. Hadley posts his men per Fell's plan, one at the scullery door, one at the conservatory, another by the front, and a pair in the upper passage. The study stands as it did, lamp-trimmed, scarlet cloth pinned, brandy set out, and bell rope hanging like an idle serpent. You watch Fell draw the company together, very tight as wire, Kemp the chemist alert and dry. Miss Vane small and inward, Miss Arden composed with her hands folded on her gloves, and Julia refusing to sit, a little too proud, a little too pale. Fell booms with a schoolmaster's cheer. We shall keep this civil and harmless, no accusations, merely a demonstration. The house will do what it did last night, but on cue. Superintendent, oblige me, bar the study from within. Butler, delighted to play usher to a miracle, steps inside, turns the key, and leaves it jutting in the lock on the other side. He shuts the door. The key's bow glints like a small moon inside the room. Fell moves with surprising delicacy, dusting a faint trail of chalk along the skirting outside, low as a mouse's path. He touches the rope's tassel with the thinnest kiss of lampblack. Stage makeup, he says amiably. If the house performs, we should see where the rogue comes off. Hadley clears his throat. Order of operations? Order is everything, Fell answers. First the back kitchen door. Then, after a count of 10, crack the scullery window. Then, at my word, raise the conservatory transom exactly the breadth of a shilling. We shall watch the candle's flame lean, and, if our little vanity is still in place, the bell will answer. His eyes twinkle. If nothing moves, we learn that my theory is rubbish, and you may hoot me out like a pantomime villain. He plants himself squarely opposite the scarlet curtain, cane across his knees. You feel the hush cinch tight. Far away, a door thuds. Back kitchen, Fell calls quietly. A draught strokes your ankles. In the study, the candle flame flutters, then steadies, as if remembering a tune. Count, Fell murmurs. You count them because he asks you to. 1, 2, 10. Scullery! A colder breath curls along the floor. The candle leans a hair toward the pinned cloth and holds. Fell's chin dips once, satisfied. Conservatory, he says. There is the softest click of the sash. The candle bows fully toward the scarlet, as though tugged by invisible fingers. A second later, the bell rope gives a shy twitch, then another, a franker swing that sets the tassel swaying. A smear of black appears on the wainscot, where the fringe kisses wood. Butler expels a laugh that is almost a shout. There! You see it! Air where air should not go. Tug where no hand should pull. Hadley raises a palm, but you can hear breath in his voice. Very pretty. Mechanics, superintendent, not spirits, Fell says, genial and implacable. Close the conservatory. The transom snicks. Wind dies. The candle straightens. The rope comes to rest. Now, Fell goes on, voice gone very mild, a trifle about doors. Mr. Butler, rap the study panel, lightly. Butler taps with a knuckle. The key inside answers with a faint, springy tick. Thank you. Fell's head tilts. If a hair-fine loop lay round that key, drawn along the skirting where chalk now lies, it would raise no outcry from wood or brass. Observe, only observe. He sifts the chalk with his cane tip. A tiny furrow breaks the dust for the space of an inch, no more than a whisker's mark, along the board. Avery's voice creaks. That could be anything. A beetle. Indulge me, Fell says, still mild. We've more theatre yet. Mr. Kemp, might you lend me 1 inch of your magnesium ribbon? No fuss. I shall not let it near the cloth. Kemp flushes a guilty colour and produces a folded slip from a case. For a chemistry demonstration only, Doctor. Fell smiles. For a shadow demonstration, rather. The brightness of a flare can stamp an afterimage on the eye and even faintly on cloth if the lamp sits close and the cloth is thin. We shall not scorch a thread, only prove that a lantern can draw pictures where none stand. He nods to Hadley, who readies a basin. On my count, Superintendent, hold the basin near the hearth. The ribbon gives a brief, violent daylight. The room gasps. The scarlet leaps alive. After images whirl. When the flash dies, smoke snakes up. Then things. Evidence, Hadley says dryly. Only principle, Fell replies. Principles burn beautifully, Pargeter told us. So do photographs and reputations. A man who bought a lantern box in a tin, who burned a photograph and cried shadows. Such a man was preparing a scene. And someone else improved it. Butler is crackling with energy. And now the coup de théâtre? Nearly. Fell turns his head, geniality back in place like a hat. We repeat the breath once more, but in the wrong order. Scullery first, then kitchen, then, only if I say, conservatory. He waits. Scullery. A small hush. The candle inclines a thought, not a bow. Kitchen. The flame quivers, indecisive. Fell sits very still. We shall not open the conservatory, he says, as if to the air. Not yet. For a heartbeat, nothing moves. Then Miss Arden glides half a step toward the conservatory corridor, her eyes still on Julia as though attending her. It is such a small movement you'd forgive yourself for missing it. But Fell's head turns like a compass needle. Don't trouble yourself, Miss Arden, he says pleasantly. We'll dispense with the transom. Colour rises and falls in her cheeks. I only meant to fetch a wrap. Miss Julia is chilled. Julia stiffens. I am perfectly warm. Of course, Miss Arden replies, the kindness polished to a shine. Fell lets the silence lengthen until it hums. Then, almost lazily, very well. Mr. Butler, if you please, raise the conservatory by a shilling. Butler goes, and at the instant the sash lifts, 2 things happen at once. The candle bows hard, the bell jerks sharply, and a sudden lick of flame races up the curtain's pinned edge, where the magnesium smoke has left a film. It is tiny at first, a blue tongue tasting cloth. Down, Hadley snaps. Fell is already moving with a speed that startles his bulk. He hooks the burning edge away from the lamp with his cane. Hadley smothers and Butler beats. In the confusion, Avery stumbles backward. Kemp flings his handkerchief. Miss Vane cries out. And Miss Arden, quick as a nurse to a wardrobe, lunges not at the fire, but for a small panel in the skirting by the bell run, where her fingers dart with surgical certainty toward a pinhead sunk in wax. Stop, Fell says, and his voice is no longer genial. It fills the room and makes the boards hold still. Stand away from that panel. Her hand freezes above the tiny brass spot, no more than a fly's eye to any other gaze. The fire gutters into a scorch and dies. The room exhales. The bell rope gives one last foolish swing and is still. Hadley straightens, breathing hard. "What?" he says evenly. "Were you about to touch?" Miss Arden's lashes lower and rise. "The wall. The plaster is crumbling. I thought—" "Of course," Fell says, all honey again. He takes the basin from Hadley and sets it primarily on the hearth. "Nothing so vexing as damp and plaster. Pray for our suspicions." He turns to Kemp. "Sir, will you look at the window latch? Humour me." Kemp obeys, puzzled. "It looks— oh." His fingers dabbed to the brass come away faintly grey. "Graphite. Fresh. Thank you," Fell murmurs. Someone keeps her tools ready. Butler, who has been watching Miss Arden with the bright appetite of a prosecutor scenting blood, cannot help himself. "Doctor, shall we end it now?" Fell's smile deepens into something that shows teeth. "Not yet, Mr. Butler. Not for the world. One encore remains, and I would like our conjurer to play it out." He faces the company as if about to tell a bedtime story. "We have learned enough, I think. The house breathes to order. Bells obey drafts. Threads leave their whiskers trail. Our miracle has joints and screws. I will not spoil the last turn. But I suggest, Superintendent, that you and I take a quiet stroll in half an hour, only so far as the scullery, and watch who visits the panel when the audience is dismissed." Hadley nods, hard and short. "We'll be there." Fell settles again, enormous and suddenly very tired. "Ladies, gentlemen, thank you for indulging a fat man's theatricals. We are finished. Sleep if you can." They drift out with the guilty relief of witnesses excused. The corridor drinks them down. You remain a moment longer, feeling the house slowly unclench. Fell sits with eyes half closed. Then somewhere in the hush behind the wainscot, the metallic tick begins again, louder, urgent, followed by the tiniest snick of something being drawn through graphite and chalk, a whisker line in the dust heading straight for the little brass pin Miss Arden almost touched. The house goes quiet in the wake of Fell's experiment, as if it knows a speech is coming and means to hear it. Hadley gathers everyone into the library, the only room that still feels honest. The lamplight glows on calf bindings. Fog presses its nose to the windows. You take your place where you can watch faces. Avery drawn thin, Kemp's moustache neatly combed, Miss Vane small and tense, Julia rigid with defiance, and Miss Arden calm as porcelain with her hands folded on her gloves. Butler lounges by the mantel, already smiling as though at a verdict he expects to applaud. Fell settles his immense bulk in an armchair that creaks in protest. His cane lies across his knees like a magistrate's staff. "My friends," he begins, voice large and amiable, "we have been chased about by a scarlet ghost. I propose we shake hands with him and find only the stagehand's glove." Butler gives a bow. "Proceed, Doctor. The gallery awaits." "Impossibilities first," Fell says. "The locked door. The key was turned from the corridor with a hair-fine loop, gut or silk, laid round the bow while Sir Roland still lived. That loop ran through the mouse road under the door to the bell-run hollow. Graphite, as you saw on the latch and again just now, eased its bite. After death, a tug from the passage turned the key. A hard jerk freed the loop, and it whisked back into its little case. You heard, in your bones, the memory of that strain when the key ticked to my cane." Hadley grunts, but his pen is already writing. "The bell that rang itself," Fell continues, "was no more spectral. A vein or loop, pinned to the bell run, sat where a breath would reach it. When the back door, scullery window and, note the order, the conservatory transom opened, the house breathed across that vein and pulled the cord like a shy servant. Reverse the order, and it sulks. You saw as much. Butler spreads a hand, theatrical. And the shadow on the scarlet cloth. A lantern square or a magnesium flash will stamp an after-image upon eyes, and, faintly, on thin cloth, pinned close to a lamp. Fell's spectacles glitter. Sir Rowland bought a lantern box in a tin. Mr. Kemp sold him a ribbon bright as lightning. The cloth was pinned, not hung, and the poker's tip shows fresh heat where the pin's wax was softened into place. The silhouette was contrived before the murder, when Alice pinned the curtain at 8:45, so that when we later found a dead man in front of it, we would marry shadow and corpse in our minds and call it a miracle. Kemp colours, muttering. The flash smoke, yes, would leave that tang. Fell nods. Now the cup and the glass. White sediment in brandy, a cocoa cup wiped, not washed, shoved behind a bin. The murderer prepared both ways. Sir Rowland drank from the brandy by habit. The cocoa stood as a reserve. No chloral from his chest did this. A harsh assault, easily dusted on a stopper or spoon, will curdle the taste to chalk and ashes and leave a pale ring. The rag that wiped it was found where servants seldom pry. Hadley looks up. Name the hand. In a moment, Fell says, suddenly gentle. Motive first. Sir Rowland had taken to threats. He waved a photograph at the club, Pargeter saw, promising exposure and ruin. The ash in the grate still whispers, photograph. One print, perhaps, burned in public to whet fear. Another kept to finish the humiliation. He meant to summon his household and denounce someone with a lamp and shadow as his pulpit. The trick of the Scarlet Theatre served his purpose, until a second hand improved it. Butler's voice drops, velvet soft. And whose ruin? Fell turns his large face to Julia. Yours, my dear, not for wickedness, but for a private indiscretion that small towns magnify. A photograph taken in a studio with a man your uncle disliked. Nothing vile, only compromising to a censorious eye. He would have cut your allowance and your name to ribbons for the pleasure of stamping. Am I wrong? Julia's chin quivers, then steadies. You are not wrong, she says, proud through tears. He kept me a child and wanted a scandal to prove it. Miss Arden's gloved hands tighten just once. Fell inclines his head. Someone in this house loved Miss Julia, like a penitent loves a prayer book, quietly, utterly. Someone who tacked carpets and learned the house's veins, who carries pins, who, when I withheld the conservatory cue, moved by reflex toward it to open the breath, who went not to fire but to the panel to save her machinery when the curtain flared, whose glove would print graphite if I asked for it now. His voice gentles, but it is iron. Miss Arden. Silence strikes like flint. Butler's smile fades to something hungrier. Hadley does not move. Miss Arden's face scarcely changes. Only her gaze lifts, calm as if answering a bell. If you accuse me, she says, say the whole of it. Fell obliged without triumph. You prepared both draughts, Miss Arden, dusted brandy's stopper and left cocoa ready, then hid the cup. You looped the key earlier while bringing medicines and speaking of draughts. You polished one quadrant of the bell tassel with use. You pinned the vein and planted that waxed brass pin by the skirting. You rubbed graphite on the latch and loop. Tonight, you tried to pluck your pin when the fire, my fault, gave you cover, and you went to the conservatory at the wrong time because, my dear, you knew that order matters. Avery exhales, strangled. For the sake of a girl's reputation, you killed a man. Miss Arden's composure cracks, not with hysteria, but with a clear human anger. For the sake of a home, she says. For the sake of a life not yet ruined. He would have shown her, he said. He liked shows. He liked to teach. I taught him one lesson in return, that doors can shut. Kemp looks sick. And the conservatory light? Magnesium on a saucer, she answers. Pinned ready. I timed it with the drafts to make you all run. Butler finds his voice. The photograph? Her mouth hardens. I burned it at dawn. The club has words. The fire had the truth. Fell's head bows once, heavy. You built the theatre not to boast, but to confuse. You wanted Yard to call it suicide. You wished Mr. Butler to chase shadows. While we argued about lamps, the photograph was of ash, and the girl was safe. Hadley's tone is level, almost kind. Miss Arden, I must warn you, anything you say. I have said it, she replies. She looks at Julia, and for the first time, the mask drops entirely. Forgive me. Julia takes a half step as if to go to her, then stops, torn between love and the hard wall of the law. I didn't ask you. No. A small grave smile. That is why I could. Butler clears his throat, his baritone steadying. Doctor, the mechanism, show it, that the court may see its wires and not witchcraft. Fell nods to Hadley. Lift the panel where her hand went. You will find the vein pinned to the bell run, and the end of the silk where it bit the key. And in the medicine drawer, Superintendent, a paper of salts dusted with brandy's sting. The rest is method and timing. The true theatre is finished. Hadley signals, and constables step forward with awkward gentleness, as men do when duty hurts. Miss Arden rises without fuss, smoothing her skirt as if leaving a patient's room. I will come, she says. Only one kindness. Let Miss Julia go upstairs before the bustle. Hadley glances to Fell. Fell inclines his head, and Julia, eyes shining, disappears down the passage like a shadow slipping from its lamp. He levered himself to his feet, breath a little shaky, and for a moment he seemed older than the house. These cases, he mutters to Butler, are always about pride and pity, arm wrestling in the dark. His gaze drifts to the scarlet curtain. Shadows are honest in their way. They tell you where a body stood even after the body is gone. Butler exhales, some theatre returning to his tone as armour returns to a soldier. Well, Superintendent, there is your lecture. The law may have the last act. Hadley closes his notebook with finality. It will. And as the constables lead Miss Arden past the study, the pinned scarlet cloth stirs with the faintest draught. The old silhouette, battered by smoke and breath, loosens from the fold and slides down the curtain like a falling petal, leaving only red behind. You watch the door close on Miss Arden, the corridor swallowing the last click of the constable's boot. The house exhales. It is a small, tired sound, the sort an old stage makes when the audience has gone and the footlights are cool. Fog presses a flat hand against the panes. The scarlet curtain hangs dull and honest, its shadow play fallen away. Hadley sets the law in motion with a few quiet sentences. Briggs, the panel, and bell run go into evidence. Seal the salts, the cocoa cup, the brandy decanter, the pins, and that lantern tin Grimes described if we find it. Wilkes, no more tidying. Leave things where they are. His voice is clipped, never unkind, and it steadies the servants the way a hand steadies a skittish horse. Butler, still by the mantel, recovers his theatre with a flourish. We have seen an encore, Superintendent, and a curtain call besides. The jury will not need much prompting. Powder, thread, sequence, admirably didactic. Save the prompting for court, Hadley mutters, yet a ghost of a smile twitches. He shuts his notebook and looks older for a heartbeat. Get some sleep, all of you. The household begins to reassemble itself like furniture slid back after a performance. Mrs. Bidds reclaims her territory, rebuking the air for daring to smell of smoke. The parlour-maid Alice wipes her eyes. Then, remembering Fell's kindness, squares her shoulders as a soldier might. Mr. Avery hovers near the library door, throat cleared for business. Miss Vane slips past like a shadow that prefers walls to people. Kemp, the chemist, says too loudly that his shop will revise its policies regarding magnesium ribbon and hypo, then blushes and retreats, his moustache bristling with embarrassment. Julia Tremaine remains. She stands at the study threshold, a pale figure with battle in her eyes, and when she speaks, her voice does not wobble. "Will she hang?" she asks. Hadley answers plainly. "Number not for this. The charge will be what the evidence bears. That is for later." Fell lumbered nearer, gentleness made vast by the size of him. "There will be counsel," he says, "and a bench that listens. The law is clumsy, Miss Julia, but it knows the difference between malice and misdirected love." She looks up at him. "I don't know if I can forgive it." "Do not hurry," Fell says. "Forgiveness given in haste is vanity with a halo. Time will lay hands on the sharp edges." Julia swallows and nods once, and you see the child in her step back from the window, so the woman may stand there. She turns to Butler suddenly, defiant to the end. "I suppose you'll make a speech to me at the club." Butler's bow is unexpectedly grave. "I shall make no speech of Miss Tremaine. The law's appetite is large enough without my seasoning." He adds, with a crooked smile that suits him better, "If I am tempted, I promise to eat my own eloquence." Avery seizes the pause. "Miss Julia," he says, voice dry and not unkind. "I'll see to the allowances at once. There'll be no theatrics in the accounts ledger." "You may tell the vicar," Butler murmurs to you aside, "that the estate's repentance runs fast when lamps are removed." But even he cannot stir his full mischief. The night has wrung it out. In the library, Miss Vane lingers by the blotter as though it might begin dictating again. Fell ambles to her, hat in hand. "You will find work," he says. She lifts tired eyes. "A secretary who kept still while a theatre was built. A secretary who did her job and then kept still because shame fogs good sight," Fell answers. "That is common enough." She nods without thanks or resentment, and slips away like a page turned quietly. Kemp, catching Fell at the door, blurts, "Doctor, I never meant those sticks. Any fool can buy them." "Then reform suits, Mr. Kemp," Fell says kindly. "A notice in your window will do. No fireworks for melodrama." The repairs begin almost at once, the bell bracket screwed back firm, the carpet edges smoothed and tacked, the draught snake returned to its place as if a sleeping dog had been coaxed home. The study remains sealed, its scorch a thin bruise along the curtain hem. Within an hour, the house sounds different. Not innocent, houses never are, but ordinary. No hidden breath kisses the tassel, no graphite whispers from the latch. When Hadley orders the windows cracked for air, honest air comes in, cold, damp, and untheatrical. Butler lights a final cigarette, watches the smoke climb, and shakes his head. "You know, Fell, I could almost be persuaded to believe in ghosts if they would file decent affidavits. As it is, your ghost turns out to be a nurse with pins in a tidy packet." "Ghosts are seldom tidy," Fell says, settling with a satisfied groan into an armchair that survived the night. "It is tidy people who cause most of the better impossibilities." Hadley reappears, cap in hand. "We've the vein, the loop, and the graphite. Kemp's ribbon case was tucked in the coal scuttle. It's an open road from here." For a moment, his tone eases. "You've earned your beer, Doctor." Fall brightens like a stove coaxed with coal. "I have," he declares, "and I mean to collect it." He stumps toward the door, then remembers himself and turns back to Julia. "If the curtain offends, have it taken down in the morning. Let Mr. Grimes sell you green damask and tell you it flatters the complexion." She smiles despite herself. "I shall, Doctor." Outside, the night has thinned into a pearl grey almost morning. Fog clings in torn scarves along the hedges. The gravel is dark with dew. The village is not yet awake enough to gossip, which is its own mercy. Fell breathes the cold like a man greeting an old friend, and the sharp air seems to polish him. Butler tucks his hat under his arm and falls into step, cane tapping. Shall we drink at the Crown and Mitre or frighten the landlord of the King's Arms? The Crown and Mitre, Fell pronounces. Their beer is honest, and their chairs do not collapse under a gentleman of reflective habits. Hadley, grim even in kindness, peels away toward his men. I'll join later, if the paperwork does not drown me. You will float, Superintendent, Butler calls. Your little book is a stout plank. Hadley raises 2 fingers in a salute and goes on with his burden. You follow Fell and Butler down the drive, listening to gravel, cane, and breath. At the gate, Butler glances home. The scarlet window glows very faintly, a lamp turned low to keep fear from breeding in corners, and the shape of a curtain is only a curtain. There's a moral in this, he says, looking pleased to have found one. Never trust a shadow with a solicitor's memory. Fell snorts. Trust shadows. Distrust tidy minds with time on their hands. They tramp the lane in companionable silence until the inn's sign creaks overhead and the smell of beer turns shadow into mercy. Fell orders 2 pints and something solid. Butler produces a brandy for form's sake and a toast for necessity. To the doctor, he says, tempering grandiosity with warmth, who will never be a judge, and God be thanked, because it would rob our profession of the finest witness alive. Fell's eyes twinkle behind misted lenses. Nonsense. Judges sit too still. I prefer chairs that sway when I do. The pints arrive. Fell drinks with solemn gratitude, as though beer were a liturgy. Butler, restored to himself, leans back with a satisfied sigh. Well then, he says, waving cigarette smoke into ornate whirls, let us agree that the next murderer will kindly commit his crime in a room with windows open and curtains blue. I am weary of red. Fell pats his cane, content. Red is for theatres, my dear Butler. Blue is for mornings after, when the world holds still long enough for breakfast. He eyes the pie as though it had personally atoned for human wickedness. And now, if you love me, let me eat quietly. A solved impossibility is an appetite. Butler gives a little bow, magnanimous to his bones. As my learned friend pleases, only he cannot resist. When the next shadow sends in its card, do me the favour of booking me a front row seat, and if the house insists on bell ropes, let them ring for champagne.